even when they weren't underperforming. And we had metrics and measurements from our analytical staff on what goals we want the players to hit during practice, during stage games, and we were just very upfront with Turtle about the things he needed to work on. And I think because those are things that made sense for him to work on as well, and the metrics were there, he was able to take it gracefully. And he honestly, even with a good process, sometimes, like you said, certain players aren't able to handle it, but he handled it very well and he worked really hard. And for sure, anyone can see pre-swap and post-swap, he was just performing at a much higher level.
What were some of the things that you said you wanted to see him improve in academy, and when did you start to say, okay, I think he might be ready to come back?
I think I wanted him to have higher game impact, especially in academy, and I wanted him to avoid. I wanted him to just have a little bit more of a veteran presence and have a little bit more stability. And I think that really showed. I think his game impact when coming back has been, like, his stats show it, his play shows it, has been a lot higher, like whether it's impacting the game through Ash arrows or impacting the game with getting early priority for our jungler to get scuttle crabs. He's just been he's just shown a lot throughout the game, throughout the games. And like you said, you could definitely see it in the C9 series. You could definitely see it in our regular season games towards the end.
So let's talk about that then. So now it culminates with FlyQuest facing Cloud9 in the playoffs. The winner books their ticket to Worlds. The playoffs continue. And you, FlyQuest, you being FlyQuest, soundly defeat Cloud9. At times looked like the farly superior team. This was a very impressive performance by FlyQuest, many would say, I would say as well. When you look back on that series, like, just dissect it for us a little bit. Like, what led to FlyQuest's great success? Take me through drafts. Like, from your lens, why was FlyQuest so successful in this series?
Two major reasons. I think we were peaking at the right time. I think we had a really solid understanding of what worked for us in this meta. So playoff teams scrim on the same patch for all of playoffs, and the patch hasn't changed that much from the previous patch. So we had a really strong identity of what worked for us throughout the patch. And honestly, I thought Cloud9 dropped, I don't think it's a secret, but they dropped the ball a little bit on what worked for them. I felt like their drafts were not playing to their strengths. To be a little bit more specific, like the Yuumi pick is heavily criticized through social media. I don't think it's a big secret. I think it's fine to execute once, even twice. I'm okay with doing the salty run back, but by the time it's the elimination game or the third game, I felt like they would have made some adjustments or shown more cards, but it felt like they had no other adjustments and they couldn't kind of handle what we were prepping for them. And it felt like their preparation was a little bit off while we prepared very hard for C9. We studied C9 a lot. We like the record was that, like, I think we hadn't beaten them all year, and we were like 1-10 against them from last year as well. But they had a lot of data on us as we played as we played a whole playoff series up to game 5 before. But it felt like their prep was not very effective.
You mentioned the salty run back there. Can I ask your opinion, just like the philosophy of the salty run back as a coach? Like, how much of that is the players just really want it and you just acquiesce, like, okay, take your run back. Like, it seems like this is what's happening here, versus a concentrated, methodical effort. Like, okay, we might have lost this game, for example, but I saw some places I'm going to tell my team to improve here, and I think we can take this one. Like, what is the philosophy, maybe pulling the fourth wall here, of the salty run back from a coach's perspective?
Honestly, League of Legends has so much variance in why you got ahead, why you're behind, why you can execute your win condition, why you can't. So honestly, it depends team by team and how the coach leads it or how players have voiced their opinions. But I think a big factor in salty runbacks is if you run this win condition again, or if you run this comp again, do you think that your team will execute their win condition better than the enemy team? Or do you think that this is about the level of your comp of the execution of your comp that your players can do on this day. And you kind of have to factor those things in. And obviously, player input is very important as you want them to have a good mindset going into the game and believe in the comp that they're playing. But I honestly believe that if you um, if you think that you can win with this comp, then it's more than fine to go for. And obviously, it depends on what sides are selected by the losing team. So how best of fives works in playoffs is the team that lost gets to choose the side. So if it is the same side that you just played, then you have to think about what adjustments you need to make. And if you felt like your pick and ban was very solid and there was just one or two mistakes that can easily be solved, then you kind of go for it again.
So now you face Team Liquid in round 4. Talk about your compatriot coach, fellow Canadian, fellow British Columbian in Jet, first-time coach, but very well respected as a caster. What did you make of his maiden voyage as a coach and where Team Liquid is under his tutelage?
I think it's undeniable Team Liquid had a very good split, especially if you kind of compare and contrast it with their spring split performance. I think Jet, along with Kane, who I've worked with, and Tyler, and all the people at Team Liquid have done a really good job. There's no denying that. I think they're a very disciplined and solid team. And I think that a lot of that does come from having veteran players along with having a really good system from the coaching staff. So I think, yeah, I have nothing but respect for all those guys at Team Liquid.
So that match is happening this week, of course, and the winner will punch their ticket to the grand finals of the LCS. Of course, you're already qualified for Worlds. So take me through, I mean, you're still thinking about LCS playoffs.
Of course.
But by now, even thoughts of Worlds have to be seeping into your mind, even as someone who's foreshadowing the big prize, the thing that teams strive for. You have accomplished this. You are going to Worlds. So when does that, take me through the planning for Worlds, even if it hasn't started yet because you're still in the postseason. When does that happen? What will preparation for Worlds for you and FlyQuest, but from you as a coaching perspective, what will that look like?
Like you said, obviously we do have thoughts of Worlds and how our training is going to go, how our boot camp's going to go, all of that in the back of our minds. But officially, it won't start for us until after our last LCS game, our last playoff game. Hopefully, it's the grand finals and we win it. But after that, we'll know whether we're in planes or not, and then we'll kind of determine like how we're going to map out our training regimen and structure from there.
How does choosing, like, just generally, even like in the past, even from your experience, I know this is your first Worlds, but you had been involved even unofficially in the past. How does selection for scrim teams and boot camp work at the World stage? Like, how do you envision choosing teams that would most benefit FlyQuest going into Worlds from around the world?
So the way I understand teams have done in the past, and very similarly probably how we will tackle it, is it first off, it definitely depends on the timing of the group stage picks. So let's say, for example, we're in group stages and we're not in plans and we have our group set. We would honestly want to avoid scrimming the teams in our groups. We don't want to give them any information. But we want to scrim strong teams. I think there's a couple of different ideologies from coaches. Some coaches, fresh off of boot camp, want to kind of ramp up and scrim teams that they think they're definitely capable of beating and kind of ramping up to facing the stronger teams. Some teams want to verse the stronger teams right away and get the meta set, get pick ban information as soon as possible, and kind of make sure that we're playing the right champions for us and finding our identity as fast as possible against the world's strongest teams and what works against the world's strongest teams. For us, it'll depend. I think this world is a little bit special because of the Shanghai bubble and the timing of like the group draw and everything being a little bit accelerated. So we'll have to see exactly what logistics we have to work with. But generally, there's like two different ways of thinking about it, whether you ramp up or whether you kind of dive right in and see how your players do in the midst of the chaos.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens and how that all unfolds and hearing the stories from the Shanghai bubble. But we're not quite there yet. obviously, playoffs continue. You'll be facing Team Liquid next in the LCS, the postseason, and the winners final. Let's get to your coaching career. You've had quite an interesting one, actually. You've spent time previously in the LCS. You've spent time in lower leagues as well, but also in Europe, which I find very interesting because I would love to pick your brain on the philosophies of coaching on both ends of the ocean, right? Like, does anything differ? Does the culture differ? What exactly is different about coaching players in Europe versus coaching players in North America, if anything? What have you found?
So before this year, when I was in North America, I worked with relatively younger players or newer players, like when I was on Team Liquid especially, players that, were new to the scene. And I do think in Europe, I did have a little bit of a culture shock compared to like those kind of players. I think the players that I worked with, especially on Schalke, were um, mostly veterans with the exception of one or two players. Like Abadage wasn't a veteran at the time. Memento has had some experience, but not like a full-fledged veteran. But I think the culture of just the European culture, I think people are a lot more blunt and quick to say what's on their mind. And in a sense, I guess, less empathetic, but still very humanistic. I think it's very effective for giving criticism and receiving criticism. I think there's a lot less emotion involved in terms of that. And I think the players are generally a lot more concerned about scrim results, which can be a good and bad thing. But I do think the culture that I was a part of a Schalke with like Dylan and all those people there, it was very interesting for me that the players honestly could lead review very well, and they were a lot more open to giving and receiving direct criticism without the coach being involved and having to mediate. So I thought that was really interesting. And generally speaking, I do think the level of the average level of teams and the solo queue is a little bit higher in Europe, and I think that kind of definitely compounds with each other, and it definitely snowballs into just having better discussion, having better play, and just having a little bit more thoughtfulness in the quality overall.
So, DLim, you mentioned that you were part of the coaching staff for Schalke at one point. You coached players like Odo Amne and Abadage, or Faker Dage, as people call him now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the miracle run. What are you making of Schalke's incredible run right now in the LEC postseason, and how do you feel watching it as a former member of their coaching staff?
I mean, I think it's amazing. I still have good connections and a good relationship with a lot of the guys there, like namely Odo and Dylan. And I think it was really sad for me to watch them not do so well at the start. But I mean, honestly, just as a fan of League of Legends in general, a run like that is so historic and so amazing that you just kind of have to appreciate it. But on top of like being able to talk to them and get how they were feeling at times and kind of seeing it secondhand through them it's just a really good feeling that happened to some of my good close friends. So I'm really happy for them. I think it's really good for the league. I think it's really good for the league overall. And I would like to see them go to Worlds and kind of see them at the world stage, some of my former teammates. So hopefully they continue their run and we'll see how far they go.
What do you think that will feel like if it happens that FlyQuest faces Schalke at Worlds? How do you think that will feel like for you?
Once we get to Worlds, I'm sure it'll be any other opponent, and we'll prep the same. We'll make sure that we are definitely playing to win and making North America proud. But on a side note, on a personal note, it would be really exciting for me. Amazing. I would love to compete against those guys and see those guys and see how we stack up.
So the power of evil will smite God Gilius, is what you're saying.
Of course.
In the battle of good versus God versus evil. Let's talk about, speaking of branding, FlyQuest has done a fantastic job. I think, like, you and I both know in esports, the branding is typically like, oh, cool, look at this apparel, this team is awesome and cool and edgy, etc. FlyQuest has gone the complete opposite way, and I absolutely love it. I think that like TreeQuest, SeaQuest, all of these initiatives are incredible. And I think that the team has done a really, really good job in executing this and doing good in the world. Obviously this is possibly different departments than you, but like, what would your involvement be in the execution of this or even the conception of all of this? How much does the coach get involved in these kind of initiatives?
So Trisha and Ricky and all the people at the business staff have done an amazing job at, like I said, having an open dialogue with all the performance staff on what's kind of going on with the company, what her vision is, and direct involvement. Like she's always open to criticism or like ideas that we would have, but obviously at the end of the day, it's kind of like her vision and her direction. But I felt like it was so spot on. She was so genuine with it from the start, from like the first time I met Trisha was this year, like when I joined FlyQuest. Like I didn't know her beforehand, but she's just such a genuine person, and just honestly, TreeQuest, SweetQuest, all these things like kind of embody who Trisha is as a person. So I felt like it was all the things that we've done on branding, I felt like was really spot on to like kind of our company operates. And it's honestly a very exciting thing. Not only are we involving the game with it really well, I felt like we're actually doing a lot of good to the world and showcasing greatness like our hashtag is. So I felt like it was done really well.
Ricky promised me that I could name one of the fish. Can you get on him with that, please? If you could just like follow up with Tricky and say, hey, you promised Arda that you can name one of the fish in the aquarium, and he kind of ghosted me after that. He just kind of left me hanging out to dry. Thank you, appreciate that. Think it'll be better coming from you. Let's get back to you. I want to learn more about you and your coaching style. Is there an example? Let me ask you this: is there an example from this season, even if it was a minor detail that you're proud of, like a conversation with a player or something you noticed that you were able to change in your team? Is there something that sticks out to you that you were proud of and how you handled as a coach this past season?
I think this might be an obvious one, but I just felt like the move up with Turtles was just done really well. I think when Turtle moved up, there was still room for improvement on his first week back, and I set him down. We had a really, really serious talk about what I expect to see from him in the very next week and what I want, and he responded to the challenge really well. And I think that talk was very important to not only Turtle, but for the whole team. And I think that was like an instance where I basically told him to put up or shut up, and he actually showed up really hard in practice and on stage games next week. And I think that's like probably the moment I would look back on for the year in terms of the process and not the actual achievements.
How do you describe yourself as a coach? What's your coaching style like?
I would say at this stage, I think my coaching style has definitely changed from my younger years, but at this stage, I would say I'm stern but fair. I would honestly, I've experienced so much. I've been with so many different players, so many different teams. I kind of have a decent understanding of what players are thinking generally, and I think I can reach the conclusions of certain players and know what they're trying to say. So I'll try to lead them on the right path, but at the same time, I don't want them to be undisciplined or kind of losing track of why they were good in the first place. So I would say stern but fair.
So you talked about how you handled the Wild Turtle situation, the types of conversations you had with him, but what about the team overall? What about the other players? What kind of coaching style or communication do they appreciate? Are they more hands-off? Do they prefer a little bit of micromanaging? Like, how do you approach the rest of the team?
It depends on the players. Honestly, we do have, like I said, this team is one of the more veteran teams, and honestly a blessing to coach because certain things don't need to be micromanaged from them. They don't need to learn the base concepts. But it still depends on player to player, even if they are veterans. Some players like diving into details, discussing little details. Some players are like, I generally understand the concept. Usually this exact situation isn't going to happen from game to game. So let's kind of broach the bigger topic. But it honestly depends on player to player. But I think we all have a good understanding, along with the rest of my coaching staff, like Curry and Joseph, on what feedback the players want to receive. So I think it's all there.
Let's get to some questions. A lot of people sent questions on Twitter, and this is an
Sure.
interesting one. What was the transition to head coach like for you and the team? That happened recently. So how did that happen? How did you find out, and what was the transition like?
The transition to head coach, honestly, I have a really great working relationship with Curry. Um, he was one of the people I worked with on Clutch, especially um, he was the assistant coach back then and I was the head coach. And honestly, the transition was seamless. Like me, Curry came to an understanding on how we wanted to approach the last few weeks of summer and throughout the rest of the season. And um, a lot of the transition did happen on the back end, like how I want staff to do certain things, how I want our meetings to be run, how I want our pick band prep and our pick band meetings to go. It was a lot of structural and process driven things that changed, but it was just adding a little bit of like how I want to do things, and there wasn't that much of a crazy transition.
To follow up on that, how much of your time is spent in pick band strategy meetings versus analysis of gameplay?
When we're in scrims, obviously there's a good balance, but if it's pure time, usually you have 20 to 25 minutes, depending on what team you're scrimming, of doing post-game or analysis and kind of talking it over and leading discussion with the team. It's not just pure analysis, of course. Of course, there's like discussion, mediation, and making sure that the team is in the right mindset for the next few games of scrims. And then we always still do add in time to talk about draft and talk about pick ban for things that we need to practice, things that we things that we're actually prepping for and scouting for. So there is a good balance. I wouldn't put a number to it, but I wouldn't put a number to it, but there is a good balance of both.
That question was from Tree Fan, by the way. Just wanted to give them credit. This one comes from Nick in Los Angeles. Are you the best or the worst?
As of right now, I think we're the best, honestly. Great question, Nick. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Nick in Los Angeles. I wonder who that might be. This one comes from Izanami, who says they worded it as what was it like in EU, but just to generalize it, I'd like to ask it as how do you look back on your time in EU as a coach?
So Europe was really fun. Europe was really fun to be a coach for because I'm honestly blessed with very talented and hardworking players in FlyQuest, but I think the culture and I think just the mood of the European players are very similar to the players that I have on FlyQuest, which I vibe really well with. The only thing is I wish I had a little bit more scouting knowledge when I was in Europe, because in North America, I think one of my strengths is knowing a lot of the players who are in the NALCS and just knowing how they like to play, how teams like to play, how teams like to draft. Well, obviously when I went in Europe, that was my first year there. So I was starting to learn how these players like to play towards the end, but obviously I didn't have it at the start.
My last question is a lot of FlyQuest fans were just generally happy that we were talking to someone from FlyQuest. I think some of the sentiment is whether it's us or just the media in general. Hold on, let me just see if we can get your, so that you can hear us here. Hold on, David. Can you hear us? How you doing?
Sorry, my headset
okay.
turned off. Yeah.
No, it's okay.
Go ahead with your last question.
Yeah, the last question is a lot of sentiment. Like we just got word from just FlyQuest fans in general, happy that we were talking about FlyQuest. Not that we were avoiding talking about FlyQuest at all, but it seems as though like there were other storylines and teams that were dominating the season, whether it's Team Liquid or TSM, Cloud9, like whatever drama was happening or just like changes or standings. Those teams seem to be the ones that got more of the spotlight, so to speak, despite FlyQuest's good results. Is there any I guess satisfaction from FlyQuest knowing that, hey, like of all the teams that got all the attention this year, we're the ones that qualified first. We're the ones that are beating those teams and shining bright and doing a good job. Like, has this been any sort of conversation within the team about like the amount of attention FlyQuest is getting from the League of Legends community? Do you feel that?
Um, Ironically, I think, especially in summer split, with like how some teams were struggling or how some teams were surging, like Cloud9 and TSM, I think, yeah, there wasn't as much talk about FlyQuest, but overall throughout the year, I think with the initiatives that we've had and the success that we've had from performance side, there was a lot of talk about FlyQuest in general. So we didn't feel that directly as much, but um, for qualifying first and beating some of these like powerhouse, like household name teams, I think that's always a good feeling, and that's just always satisfying to kind of, everyone loves an underdog story. But honestly, we didn't focus on that too much. We just focused on steadily improving our play and making sure that we were in a really good spot to compete. And we're going to continue to do so right until even after winning the championship.
Well, whether you like the good vibes and positive thoughts initiatives of Tree Quest and Sea Quest, or whether you like the play on the Rift, FlyQuest is going to Worlds, and their LCS postseason continues in summer split. DLim is the head coach of FlyQuest, joining us here on Coach's Corner. DLim, thank you very much for your time, my friend.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
And for all of you watching, this show happens every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, where we pick a different coach from around esports and talk about their philosophies and strategies to help their team succeed. Thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you next week.